Durant slowed his troop to a walk. Renoir, Rupert, Jonah, James, and Wolfgang eased up as they caught him, grateful for the chance to rest their legs. The woods were thinning quickly, and Durant saw a wide field opening up beyond its edge. The snow, unimpeded by branchy canopy, was coming down full force, ferocious in its effort to turn the world to a blank, white canvas. Durant stopped cold. Instinct, perhaps. His animal brain registering something it could not quite factor out. Durant raised a hand and halted the men behind him. He looked back for Wolfgang at the tail of the column. "Wolfgang," he whispered, summoning him with a wave. Wolfgang eased forward. Durant could make out his bullet-torn face swathed in bloody cotton. The eyes, behind the injuries, gazed back, sharp and clear. "What is it?" Wolfgang asked quietly. "It's an open field out there. No cover," Durant replied. "I'm going to have a look. Keep an eye out behind us while I do." "Yeah," Wolfgang said. Durant signaled for Renoir, Rupert, James, and Jonah to stay put. He headed for the edge of the field, while Wolfgang circled back behind them. As he left the woods, Durant began to think he had come upon some orchard, akin to the ordered ranks of trees in the field behind the Chateau de Bois. He saw that there were indeed trees in the field, and their rigid, careful placement was undoubtedly man-made, but through the dark, swirling snow he could not make out any foliage that would hold leaves and fruit of any sort. As he neared the base of the first tree, he stopped. His breath caught. He could see the naked, frost-bitten feet impaled through the ankles by a railroad spike to the dead tree. The crucified man hung from the rugged cross, limp and unmoving. Durant looked ahead, down row upon row upon row of trees vanishing away into the falling snow. This was no orchard. It was a field of ordered torture, perfectly laid out, performing lingering murder. It had been the standard of excellence for the Babylonians, Assyrians, and Persians. Alexander the Great discovered the method on his bloody trek east and was delighted to bring it home, along with mastiffs, to the Mediterranean, where the Romans, too, became fans of it and spread the brutal practice far and wide. The Roman legion popularized it so effectively that it was visited back upon them when Germanic tribes captured Roman tax collectors and staked them up violently to sacred trees for their audacity. Durant was not a student of history, but he had been to church enough times to recognize what he was looking at. This was Jesus of Nazareth, Gestus and Dismas, times 100. Durant heard men laboring. He slipped into cover behind the base of the crucifix. He recognized the sounds of logging. Distant axes striking rhythmically, a shout of warning, followed by the crack of the pith, the slow fall of the tree, and the massive whoomph it made as it struck the earth. He heard jabbering, then axes again, working their way up the fallen tree quickly, stripping it of its limbs. Durant could not tell how many men were in the logging team, but by the murmurs reaching him, he knew there must be a dozen working at the task. Had Finbar Kelly been beside him, he would have told Durant that the language was Latin, that these were the same Roman legionaries he had already escaped once, and that running fast and far was the only chance he had. Durant ducked low and made his way back into the timber, certain at any instant he would be spotted and the alarm sounded, but knowing if he ran, there was no question he would give himself away. When he got to the men, he signaled for silence and led them quick and quiet back into the dense forest. After 10 minutes he paused and they circled him. What was it? Asked Renoir, breath heaving. Crucifixions. 100. Maybe more, Durant said. Oh, Lord! James clenched his hands into fists to stop them from shaking. Perhaps we must find somewhere to hide, where we can wait for morning to come, said Renoir. I don't think so, said Durant. I think all the ones from the canal are still back there behind us somewhere. If we can't get to the other side of San Quentin this way, I think we could cut straight down to the river and follow it through the city. Wolfgang translated for Rupert and Jonah. Rupert spoke up. I know the city. My company did fatigue duty in San Quentin. I can get us through. What is it? Asked Durant. He says he knows the city well. He can guide us safely through, Wolfgang replied. Durant took a breath. In an infinite black ocean, a jot of hope. All right, let's go. Less than half a mile from Durant's party, Finbar Kelly was churning through the snow. Donnie McMaster, breath-heaving, halted along on his bum leg, 2 steps behind him. They reached a small crest and started down it when Finbar froze. Donnie came inches from crashing smack into him. The hair on Finn's neck stood, his ears hummed, a shot of cold air gulped down into his lungs. Inside his mind he screamed, but it came out of his mouth as an almost inaudible whimper. He was looking at the same field Durant had stumbled into, but from straight on. Even in the dark, he clearly saw rows of 20 and 30-foot-high crosses through falling snow. Muffled moans and whimpers of suffering from the crucified echoed up to them. A tall birch lay on the ground in the field. It had been cut down and fashioned into a cross. As Finn and Donnie watched, a man was dragged through the snow to the axis, hefted up and slammed down onto it by a pack of men. Finn and Donnie heard this victim shouting in French, then the sound of a sledgehammer hitting a metal spike punctuated his shrieks as the monsters holding him joined him to the fallen tree. Finn ducked low and slunk back into the woods. Donnie, face pale as the snow, stumbled along behind him. When they got to the peak of the rise and the rows of crosses disappeared, Finbar ran. He did not look back to see if Donnie was coming. He did not particularly care. The devil was welcome to the hindmost, and Finn devoutly intended for that not to be himself. Finbar felt the cold air burning his lungs, and the falling snow stinging his eyes, but he kept on. Being crucified had been a stubborn, recurrent nightmare. From the moment his mother explained to him why good, sweet Jesus was hammered to a cross with that gaping wound speared in his side, blood dripping from that fucking crown of thorns, eyes agog, staring up to heaven, supposedly requesting that his dear old dad forgive them. They know not what they do. Finn had never believed for a moment that the Romans knew not what they did. They knew exactly what they were doing and had done it to the best of their abilities. In young Finn's nightmares, they did it to him too. He could feel the railroad spikes nestle sharply into his palms. Imagine the pain of them being hammered between the delicate phalanges bones, driving through flesh and sinew, securing him to the pliable wood while his blood poured out. The nailing of the feet would be worse. Then the raising of the cross, putting all his weight onto the black steel pins, would eclipse all of it. The long death of dehydration while carrion birds and flies feasted on him would be worse still. The finality of death when it arrived would be pure mercy. The pain of running was nothing compared to what he had seen those same men do to his fellow Irish Fusiliers. So Finn ran, certain that dying of heart failure would be 1,000,000 times less painful and more efficient than whatever the Romans had in mind. Finn broke free from the trees and onto a road. He bent over and listened to his pulse throbbing in his ears. His chest ached. A heart attack did not come. He caught his breath. Then Donnie tumbled out behind him, face bright red and splotched, likely much closer to heart failure than Finn. He dropped the Mauser and collapsed to all fours, panting, clutching his chest. Perhaps Missy's cooking had finally caught up to him. In the long run, Finn did not particularly care if the American lived or died. He certainly hoped Donnie would die before him. But in the near term, it would be a useless death if it did not buy Finn time. Finn was struck by the realization that if Donnie did die here and now, in all likelihood, something worse would fill Donnie's flesh and become a clear and present danger immediately. "Hey, are you all right?" Finn whispered. Donnie could not speak, but he nodded. It took him long moments to regain his breath. Finn helped him up onto wobbly legs, then bent down and retrieved the Mauser with his good hand. "I'll carry this for you." Donnie nodded. He had thought about just dropping it in the woods and was glad to cede the weight and responsibility of the weapon to Finbar. "This fucking snow keeps falling. It'll fill our tracks, I think. Maybe even better on this road than in the woods where the trees can get in the way of it. I said we follow this road fast as we can till we find some place to shack up, eh? I don't figure on getting nailed up to some fucking tree." Donnie nodded again. "Okay, me neither." "Are you fit to go on?" Finn asked. Donnie did not feel fit enough to do anything, but the alternative, simply giving up and surrendering to the demons, as James Cox had done, to his instant regret the night before, was not something Donnie was ready to do just yet, so he nodded. Finn shouldered the rifle, delicately slinging it past his ruined hand, running the strap diagonally across his chest. He turned to the road and ran. Donnie trucked doggedly along behind him. Darren Tremaine slowed Bathsheba. He dismounted, wrapped her reins around a low-hanging branch. He drew his saber and bent low, easing his way toward the sound of axes biting sharply, rhythmically into living trees. When he found the edge of the orchard, he stopped. He saw the shape of the crosses rising up before him and all the ones lined up in the field beyond it disappearing into the snow. He saw the man pinned to it, hanging limp not 20 yards away. The man's eyes opened. He saw Darren. "Help me!" Darren froze. The axes striking wood in the distance kept up their percussive exchange. "Help me! Help me! Help me! Help me!" Darren heard the chopping axes falter. He backed away, turned, and ran up the hill to Bathsheba. The crucified man's screams died away with a shriek of pain and terror. Then Darren was mounted, riding, pushing Bathsheba in the opposite direction. To his great shame, he had no help to give.